In this lesson, you get to learn how to create a mushroom painting using coffee. This will be similar to technique used when using watercolor, but I know that not everybody has watercolors at home, so I wanted to teach you some techniques that you can use while using coffee to paint. So for starters, you'll need a clean piece of paper. If you have a tag board paper or something a little bit thicker than regular sheet of paper, that would be ideal. If not, a regular sheet of paper will work just fine. I happen to have watercolor paper at home, so that's what I'm going to be using for mine today. So to start with, the first step is going to be to learn how to draw a mushroom. So we're going to start with the top of our mushroom, which is going to be kind of rainbow shaped, but our rainbow is going to be a little bit bumpy. So I'm going to start about mid-page, and I'm going to create kind of a bumpy shaped rainbow that comes across the top. Now I'm drawing kind of heavy with my pencil because I want it to show up well on the screen. When you draw yours, I'd recommend that you press lightly with your pencil so that your pencil marks will be easier to erase at the end. Okay, so the next thing that I'm going to do with that rainbow shape that I just made is I'm going to go ahead and bring in some curvy lines that come across for the front side of the mushroom. And I kind of curved right here along the edge because this part's going to curve back and under. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is work on the stem of my mushroom. So about center, underneath the top part, I am going to do, it's going to be a rectangular shaped, but not using straight lines, definitely using some curved lines today. So I'm going to do the base of my stem here at the top. Like I said, it's going to be kind of rectangular shaped, like so. Okay. Then my mushroom, I'm going to show you on my sample, has a part that flares out underneath it. So this is the part that we're going to be doing next. Okay. So underneath that, I'm going to start here at the bottom corner, and I'm just going to kind of curve out my line, more curved lines here at the edge, and then bring it back up to where I had started. Okay. My mushroom stem is going to curve down towards the ground on each side. And it's going to be a little bit narrower at the top, getting a little bit thicker down towards the end. Okay. Down here at the bottom, this is where I'm going to add some grass. So straight lines, zigzag lines, just a little bit on each side. Okay, oops, I need to raise that up so you can see it. My apologies, I'll do that again. So just some straight lines and zigzag lines in through there. Okay, so now I am ready on my mushroom drawing to do the underside of my mushroom so that it looks three-dimensional. Okay, so I'm going to come back up here to that original rainbow shape that I have drawn, and I'm going to start at the corners. See here, I'm going to curve my line just a little bit more. And I want it to curve down and under, and then it's going to curve around and back up over on this side. I really don't like the way this corner is looking, so I'm just going to try to smooth that out just a little bit. There we go, that's better. Okay. So here is my pencil drawing mushroom. Here is my painted sample. You can see they're similar. They're not exact, and that's okay. They don't have to be. Okay, but we have the basic shapes ready there. Okay, so my next step, now that I have my pencil lines in place, is to go back and lightly erase those. Now I want to erase mine a little bit. If I were doing this for a final draft, I would erase it as much as I could with the ability to still be able to see the faint lines. I'm going to erase mine a little less because I want you to still be able to see them on the screen today, and I'm afraid if I erase them all the way, you won't be able to do that. So when I say that I'm lightly erasing, I am lightly erasing. When you guys erase yours, I hope that you erase yours a little bit heavier than what I'm doing. Okay, but like I said, my reasoning is that I want it to show up on the screen for you to be able to see those lines. And I may have erased this one a little too much. Let's see, I'm just going to lightly erase that so you can see a guide. Okay. Now, after you get all of your lines erased and ready to go, will be the fun part, and that's going to be painting with coffee. So let me get mine ready. Alright, now that my pencil lines are all erased lightly and ready to go, I'm ready to mix my coffee. So I always start with 1 cup of just water because I like to have plain water to mix it and dilute it as I go. I have a cup with a very small amount of water, a cup with a medium amount of water, and then a cup with quite a bit of water. The reason that I do this is because this will give me my variations in color when I paint my mushroom. So when I put in the coffee, the part that has a very little amount of water is going to show up darker. The cup that has a lot of water in it is going to show up lighter, like in this area. So I'm just using for mine instant coffee. You do not have to use the instant coffee. You can actually use coffee grounds that have already been used to make coffee. The wet coffee grounds can be mixed in with those. You just want to make sure that you strain your liquid off of it when you're done so you don't end up with the grounds in your artwork because they don't always dissolve all the way. So if you have a leftover cup of coffee in your coffee pot in the morning, you can use that and dilute it down with water to make it lighter. The stronger the coffee, the darker the color is going to be. So I'm going to go ahead and open my instant coffee, and I am going to put a scoop, and it really doesn't matter how much. I don't use very much just because I don't have very much water in my cups. So I'm going to go ahead and put a scoop into each one. And the trick with this is if you don't like the color of it, then you can always add more water or more coffee. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and put those into my cups. It dissolves pretty quickly, but I always like to stir it just to make sure that the instant coffee has dissolved. Now, if you're not a coffee drinker and you don't have coffee in your house, you can actually substitute several different things to do this same lesson. One of them would be to do tea. You could use a tea bag, make your colors lighter and darker by the amount of water that you have with your tea bag. Another one that I love to do is Jell-O. So just the powdered Jell-O, if you mix some of that powder with a little bit of water, you'll get a darker color. If you mix it with a medium amount of water, you'll get a medium shade color. And then, of course, if you mix it with a lot of water, you'll get a light color. And you can do the same thing with a Kool-Aid packet as well. So lots of options for this assignment if you are not a coffee drinker at home. So I think I have mine ready. I actually am going to do one more scoop in my darkest one just because I want to make sure it does show up really dark. Let me stir that one more time. Oh yeah, that's better. Okay, so I have my coffee mixed and ready to go. I'm going to set my cup of water up here out of the way, and I'm going to do the same for my coffees. I'll set them so you can kind of see what I'm doing here. And then I'm ready to start painting. So some of the utensils that I'm going to use today are a small paintbrush. I'm also going to be painting with Q-tips and with toothpicks. So if you don't have a paintbrush at home, know that there are other options to be able to get this activity complete as well. So let me set these over to the side. I'm going to start out on my mushroom. I'm going to do the rainbow part here at the top. And if you'll notice, I have some darker areas. So there's some darker space right here along the top corner. And then where my mushroom overlaps the background, I have some darker areas there too. So for that part, I'm actually going to use my darker coffee mixture that I made. And I'm going to go ahead and start right on the edge to do a little outline of where I want that shade to go. Okay, so I've got some of my darker color on there. Just going to let that sit for a minute. I'm going to do a little bit of that darker color as I go up. And you kind of get to decide where you want your darks and your lights. I'm just going off of my sample one that I made earlier just to kind of give me a guide. Okay, so I'm going to do a little more of that darker color along the top of my rainbow shape of the mushroom. Now, if you're not using a thicker paper, you're probably going to see your coffee bleeds a little bit more. So if you have a tag board or a light piece of cardboard, that might be the best way to do it. Even like the back of a cereal box might work for your thicker cardboard. All right. Pardon my cats. They like to make their appearance every time I zoom, I think. And every time I make a video. All right. So as you can see, I've gotten several places where I've added my darker color. And my next step is going to be just to do a little bit of blending with some of the lighter colors. Now, I don't really want it to look like I've just outlined, so sometimes I take my darker coffee and bring it up just a little bit so it doesn't look like it's just an outline along the edges of the mushroom. Then I'm going to go ahead and bring mine around to do that base part as well. And once again, I'm going to bring up some of that darker coffee so it's not just looking like I have that outline appearance. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is get just some plain water. So with my plain water cup, I've dipped my brush in there, and I'm just going to put some water right into the center of my mushroom area. I know you won't be able to see that on the screen since it's just water, but the purpose of that is to help the coffee colors kind of absorb and bleed into that water space. So I'm going to use my lighter shade of coffee. This is the one that I mixed a lot of water with, and I'm just going to kind of tap that around the edges of that water spot that I put on there, with the hopes that that coffee will kind of fade into the water area. So it won't be just one dark spot in the center. We just kind of want it to bleed into there just a little bit, or run into there. Okay, so I've got my lighter shade that I'm adding along the sides here. This is that one that has the most water mixed in with it. And I'm working it out towards the outside edge of the top of my mushroom. And you can see right here where this darker coffee is already starting to bleed into there as well. And that's what we want. So I'm going to go ahead and get some of my medium shade of coffee, and I'm going to kind of add that in there next. So it's going to be just a little bit darker. And we'll bring that right out to the edge over here. Once again, mixing in with the coffee that I've already painted on there, the darker spaces. Have it mix in right here as well. So my hope is that the colors will fade together, leaving a lighter spot in the middle, getting darker towards the edges or towards the outside. And it is okay if some of the white paper shows through. Do a little more dark in there just to give it some depth. This is just my darkest shade that I'm putting on here, and you'll notice it just kind of fades and blends right in with those lighter colors. Okay, I'm rinsing some of that dark off, and then I'm going to come back to my medium shade to go right around the edges over here. Just trying to mix in with some of that darker that I had from before. Okay, I think I want a little more of the dark down here at the bottom, so I'm going to use that darker shade of coffee just to fill in a little bit. And then I'll come back with some of the lighter just to mix them together. And once again, there's no right or wrong way of this, so if yours doesn't end up looking exactly like mine, that is okay. Just a little water. Alright, once again I'm going to do some darker. And the darker will show up more as it sets. Sometimes you have to just let it dry for a little bit. Alright, so once I have my color on there the way that I like it, I want you to take a look at my sample, so I'm going to bring it over here. I don't know how well it shows up on the camera, but you can see there are some lighter spots at the top of my mushroom. And I wanted to show you how I made those light spots too. So let me set my brush down. I'm going to get my Q-tip. My Q-tip, I'm just going to dip into my plain water cup. Okay, so basically what this is going to do is just wash off some of that coffee. So I'm going to just dot it, and it's going to make some spots. Like I said, it's basically just washing off some of the coffee that's already on there. Okay, so this part is kind of at a standstill where it needs to dry for a few minutes. So I'm going to let the top part of my mushroom dry, and while that is drying, I'm going to come down to this section and do some darker areas here. Okay, so I'm going to use my brush for this part as well. And this one I'm kind of just going around the outside edges with that darker shade of coffee. So I want this line to be pretty bold because I want it to stand out. I'm just bringing some of that color towards the center on this one. And the same thing on the section underneath. Let me slide mine up so you can see. I'm just going to use that darker coffee once again and put a little bit of an outline on that next mushroom section. Do a little bit of darker right here on this side. And a little bit over here on this side too. Okay, now I'm ready to let this dry for a few minutes, and then I'll come back to it and show you the next step. Okay, so I've allowed my mushroom to dry for a few minutes. I'm going to go ahead and try to do those spots a little better using my Q-tip just dipped in water only, and I'm just going to remove a little bit of the paint. That's better, so that those spots will show through. They don't all have to be the same size. But basically the wet Q-tip is just taking the coffee paint off of my mushroom, allowing some of those spots to show. And you may have to dip it in water a couple of times, but that's more of the look that I was hoping for with that. So the next thing that I'm going to do with mine, I'm going to go ahead and use my paintbrush in my lightest color of coffee, and I just want to go ahead and bring some of that coffee color down here onto the background part of the mushroom. I'm just kind of filling in that space. I might mix in just a little bit of my medium too, just for a little mixture of color. Now this is going to be a background because we're going to end up putting lines and texture over the top of this part, so it doesn't have to be done perfectly. I just wanted to have a little bit of darker color that will show through. So like I said, I'm just using the light and the medium shades of coffee that I mixed earlier and adding those to my background. Okay. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to do is come back to this section here that we started earlier. I'm going to use my light colored coffee and fill in there as well. This should start having those colors run together and bleed in towards the center. Got a little air bubble there. There it goes. Alright, same thing on the next section. I'm going to take that lighter color of coffee and a little bit of water this time so it's not super dark. And just mix those together too, and you'll notice that that coffee should start blending into some of that water and lighter shade of coffee. Alright, okay, so now I'm ready to come down towards the bottom of my mushroom on the stem part. So for this part I'm going to use my medium shade of coffee, and I'm going to fill my stem space with that shade. It is okay if some of the white still shows through. So I'm going to use just a little bit of plain water in with that too, just so the colors kind of run together. Okay, so I've got a light background for the stem of my mushroom. Now I'm ready to come back with my darker coffee shade, and I'm going to put just a few streaks of that on the edge, and it's going to start running towards my lighter that I had there in the center. I'm going to do just a little bit of that up here too, just to show a little shadow. That's my hope. Okay, just with that darker color of coffee, letting those colors run together. And then I'm going to do the same thing over here on this side with just a little bit of darker right along the edges. Maybe a little bit up here at the top too. Okay. Alright, and then hopefully those colors will start running together. Okay, so once again I am at a point where I just need to let it dry. So I'm going to pause for just a minute and then we'll come back and do the detail work. Now that my background is dry, I'm ready to add some detail work to my mushroom. So I'm going to do all the lines that are in on the underside of the mushroom here, and do some texture on the stem as well. So to do that, I have my darkest coffee that I mixed earlier and a toothpick, and I'm just going to start dragging lines with my toothpick from the top of the mushroom to the stem here on this underside. Just got a little dark. Let me drag that one up. Now I'm going to do part of mine with toothpick, and I'm going to do part of it with my brush just so I can get some thinner lines and some thicker lines. The toothpick allows me to get the really thin lines that I want, and then I'm going to mix in some of the thicker lines by using my paintbrush. On the toothpicks too, if you kind of drag along the side, that's where you'll, instead of using the tip of the toothpick, if you drag it more sideways, that's where you can get some of these darker lines like this one here. Okay. I'm also going to do a few of those lines coming down from my mushroom sections, just to kind of show some depth in there. I want some longer ones and some shorter lines. Alright, so my next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to set my toothpick down and get my paintbrush. So with my paintbrush, and I may add some more toothpick lines as we go, but I want to put a few guides with my paintbrush of where I want those thicker lines to be on my mushroom. I'm going to do a little bit of darker down here too, just to kind of show some shadow. And that may have to dry just a little bit before I can get all my lines through there, but that's okay. I might have missed that spot earlier when I was doing my darker pieces. I'm going to do a little bit of that darker right over here as well. Alright, so now I'm just kind of coming back in with my lines. And there's really no right or wrong. It's just making that underlay show. And those of you who know me know that I'm a little bit of a perfectionist, so it's killing me to paint this fast. You're probably thinking, no, this is not fast, this is slow. Alright, so I'm just adding that texture coming through there, some thicker lines, some thinner lines. And then I'll go back with my toothpick to add some really fine lines as well. Now, if you feel like your paint is running too much, just add more coffee to make it thicker. You can almost make it more pasty-like when you're doing these more bold lines. I'm still learning with this camera. I feel like I'm always blocking your view with my hand, so I'm going to try to turn mine a little bit as I paint so that you guys can still see. Maybe when all of this stay-at-home order is lifted, I might actually know what I'm doing with this camera by then. Alright, so like I said, just adding some real thin lines for texture on that underside. Fill in a few up here at the top. I'm going to turn it again. Get the ones over here on this side. And then I'm just going to go back with my toothpick and add a few smaller texture lines in there. They may not show up quite as well on the camera, but you'll be able to see them on your original piece. So what I'm hoping from this activity is that you guys can take some of these techniques. These are going to be similar techniques to what you would see if you were using watercolor. Okay, so this is something you can use even when we're back in the classroom and not painting with things like coffee. But I'm hoping you can take some of these techniques and use them in the future. I am perfectly fine with you creating a mushroom just like I've created today. But if you feel like you are willing to put in a little extra and challenge yourself a little bit and make something different than a mushroom, that is fine too. So use these techniques just as a guide of what you could make. This it does not have to be a mushroom for your project. This, like I said, this is just a guide. So I've added some smaller, finer toothpick lines in there. Now I'm ready to come down to my stem. I'm going to get my paintbrush again for this part. I'm going to raise it up so you guys can see the bottom. So on my stem, I'm just going to put some bold lines along the edges with my darker coffee color. I have a lot of water on my brush. Let me wipe that off a little bit. Try this again. Doing some darker edges here just to make that stem a little more bold. I'm going to do the same over here on this side. Just adding some texture lines. And then I'm ready to do the grass. So for the grass, I just have the darkest coffee stain that I made. And with that, I'm just going to start doing some lines or some zigzags down here to fill in the grass strokes. And you can do some lighter shades of coffee and some darker shades. All right. And then we have the final base there. I'm going to get my light shade of coffee and I'm just going to do a little bit of ground coming down here just to kind of add some balance so it doesn't look like the grass is coming out of nowhere. Then with my darkest color of coffee, I'm going to sign my name. And I always do my initials for mine. That's how I sign. So there's my piece that I've made with you guys viewing. And then I'm going to bring in my original one to show you that as well. Remember that this is just a guide of techniques that you could use. I am perfectly fine with you creating a mushroom just like mine. Maybe you even want to add a ladybug or a snail on top of it. Or if you want to challenge yourself and try a completely different piece, you can use those same coffee techniques and create an original picture of your own. And this is all using coffee as well. This is a bird that I created. So if you're wanting to challenge yourself and you need some help or have any questions, don't hesitate to email me or set up an appointment where we can Zoom together. So happy creating. I hope you guys enjoy painting with coffee.